Hi, this is Gene Pease, and welcome to this third podcast, and really focusing on how to get started in people analytics. These are today's webinar takeaways, and I'm really going to focus on helping you move from departmental reporting and how to overcome obstacles to get started in people analytics. And I'll show you 5 proven steps as you move from reporting to descriptive and predictive analytics, and hopefully learn a few things around communicate findings to drive change. Again, I'm Gene Pease. I've been at this for quite a while. In 2004, I bumped into some scientists at Duke University, and we founded a company and started applying really drug trial methodology to training investments. And it was really helping to shepherd in predictive analytics into the world of HR. In 2016, after we had built a software product that really duplicated the consulting work we did in predictive analytics, Ultimate Software purchased Vectrix. And last year I produced, as I finished my assignment on the transition of Vectrix being acquired by Ultimate, I spent some time and created a people analytics training course that I'll highlight at the end of this webinar. And my passion is really trying to help people and organizations move into descriptive and predictive analytics. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the vocabulary. So reporting is really the organization of data to support decisions. And it's really every company has some type of reporting, whether it's formalized systems and/or Excel spreadsheets. Descriptive analytics is really the preliminary stage of analytics, and it mines historic data to find past successes and failures. And if you move into predictive analytics or further analytics, it helps prepare the data for further analysis. Predictive analytics is really using descriptive analytics, that historical data, to predict what will happen in the future. And some people talk about prescriptive analytics, and that's really the suggestion of best actions to take. But frankly, if you're doing predictive analytics, you should be making recommendations on best actions. So we're not going to focus today at all around prescriptive. We'll focus a lot around moving to descriptive and into predictive. Reporting is typically a single metric out of a single system. We could refer to those generally as activity metrics. Descriptive analytics really starts taking multiple metrics from multiple systems and looking at trends, comparisons, and moving into the world of correlations. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. The most common tools used are Excel pivot tables, if you're familiar with those. And then predictive analytics really adds 2 elements to it. It adds statistics and it adds business metrics. We move into the world from correlation into causation. We're using multi-metrics, multi-systems, and begin to look at demographics and segment those. And in some cases, we're looking at new data sources, such as text mining or organizational network analysis, for example. And again, I won't talk about prescriptive today because most people believe it's at the very early stages and it's only being applied today by the very, very large companies that have gigantic budgets for this kind of stuff. If you look at what descriptive analytics can tell you, it's really beginning to get behind the impact and understand where your investments and or problems are in the organization. So you're really digging into, if you look at these 3 questions, it's really digging into not only is my program working, but where is it working and where is it not? And then prescriptive is really taking that data and then predicting the future. Things like what investments enable people to become high performers, who's at risk to leave NIST. So you really need to get to predictive, you need to do the work in descriptive to get there. So it's really a building block process. So we're going to launch a quick poll just to get a sense of where you are in this process. And I've labeled it as my reporting's not very good or my reporting is good. And there's various, I'll talk in a few minutes about HR data. Then some people may be doing some descriptive, I hope, and I will see if anyone is moving into the world of predictive. So we're doing a quick poll and we'll see what the results are. Okay, this is interesting. So 30, almost 40% have some type of reporting. Most believe it's not very good. 40% have descriptive. That's awesome. So there's, and 17 are beginning to apply predictive. That's fantastic. And 4% are doing prescriptive, which is a bit of a surprise to me, but well done. So this is pretty typical. There's a few more you in the advanced analytics than I would typically see in an audience. So I'm thrilled you're here, and hopefully you'll learn some things today. So, okay, there we go with the technology. So I want to go through 5 steps on really how to move from reporting and eventually move into predictive. But before I do those specific steps, I want to talk a little bit about how you get started, how you think about what are the first studies you might want to do. And this is an idea that's been shared in the industry. And it's really thinking about, on the y-axis or the left, how expensive or how long it takes to do these studies. And on the right, the x-axis would be how much business impact do we expect to see from the study. And so I would begin to think about your programs and maybe chart them against this. So it might be a large expenditure, looks like it's going to be high business impact, but take a long time and a high cost to measure it. So we might want to put it into a future bucket. We do. Long lead time to results, not huge business impact, I'd put that in the no bucket. Customer facing, we happen to be huge organizations, customer facing, not terribly high cost to do the studies, and a huge business impact. So let's prioritize that. Tactical investment, say compliance training, not hard to do, but not big business impact. We probably put in a low value. We do it, but we don't spend time measuring it. And a multi-year investment, again, has high impact and not terribly high cost. So let's put that in the prioritize. So if I was going to, by this criteria, make a decision to get started on my first study, I probably would pick my customer-facing one. There's a lot of other ways to think about this, but this is one way to maybe start prioritizing how you get going with your first problem to study or your first investment you're studying. Then I want you to think about, do you have all the necessary approvals and a sponsor, and what political issues you may bump across in doing this study? Does the organization have standard operating procedure? And who owns this data? Typically HR uses data, but IT or some other department owns it. And then make sure everything is encrypted. You're using people data. So we want to make sure it's all masked and we don't have any security issues with it. And are there any legal issues you may be bumping across? For example, recently GDPR has been adopted in Europe and it has huge ramifications for the use of personal data. This is coming to the US very quickly, and so we need to be aware of it and understand the implications of what GDPR brings to the analysis. It's going to make it harder, but actually it's going to make our work better ultimately. And then think about privacy from the person's point of view and the transparency of the organization, because frankly, employees don't believe their employers are keeping their data private. And they don't believe that they're telling them the truth about what they're collecting. And so we really are getting this terrible mistrust of organizations using our data, and for good reason with all of the recent data privacy hacks and issues that have come up. And so we really need to be transparent in this work. And so that's where ethics come in. What is the use of the findings? Are you routing people out for bad behavior, or are you trying to use this for good? Is there bias built into this, and you want to be careful of that? And then what demographics are you going to be data mining? And so the current thinking is, if you can't explain it to your employees on why you're doing a project, you shouldn't be doing it. So let's get started. So we've picked a problem, where we've picked an investment we want to investigate. And we want to make sure that we overcome any of these objections, either internally or externally, that we may have. So I'm going to help, hopefully, some of you are already doing, a lot of you are doing descriptive, so you already know where to start. Many of you have already overcome the obstacle. It's too difficult. I'll talk about your data. Your data will never be good. And the spookiness factor now is definitely coming into play. And frankly, if you're in an organization and you're interested in this work and your management's still making gut decisions, or they're too busy to start these initiatives, you probably ought to find another place to work, because you're not going to get too far ahead very quickly. So you've picked an analysis you want to do. You need to find the subject matter experts, which I would identify as the stakeholders. Those are the people in the organization that would really understand what the impact of these investments or problems are having. You then collectively with them create a hypothesis, and you design what I'll call a measurement map. And here we need some kind of a business analyst, a human capital strategist, a Bain-like consultant, potentially an MBA that's in your organization, that can really shepherd this project through and make sense out of not only organizing it, but make sense out of the findings, and hopefully present and push for change. I want you to focus your efforts around questions. Don't think about the data you have. Think about the problems in the organization and figure out if you do have the data to solve those answers. And then prioritize the questions that potentially deliver the most value. I love this quote from a friend of mine. This is in my last book, from Ian O'Keefe at JP Morgan. And this is really how you design a hypothesis. Questions is strategy aligned, create quantifiable value, and can be acted upon. Those three things, if you use those three tenets for developing a hypothesis, you'll be in really, really good shape. I want you to think about, there's always 2 points of view on doing this work. There's the organization's point of view. What's the organization trying to get out of it? Why are they making these investments and paying people to do all this stuff? And then what's the individual's point of view? Now, most people use KPI as a vernacular, and I hate the word, because there's over 12 different definitions of KPIs. And what I found in this work is that people get hung up on defining what a KPI is in the organization and not moving into doing the work. And so over the years, we developed a framework that eliminated the word KPI and replaced it with leading indicators and business results. And what you're trying to find are the cookie crumbs in the forest to get to the cottage when you're doing this work. And it's investigation from problem to outcome, or investment to strategic goal. So leading indicators are evidence of things to come. You typically cannot put a financial value on it. So if you start asking people what's a leading indicator in this vocabulary, they begin to not think about a KPI, but think about, okay, what's the evidence I might see on this? And then business outcome is exactly what it sounds like. It carries a financial value. So we build in our work a measurement map, and it can be on Post-it notes. It could be mind maps. It really doesn't matter how you do it. It's really a visual depiction to test your hypothesis. It creates a document that enables discussion. And the great thing about it identifies the systems and the data you need to do the study. So I'm not going to go into detail on this one, but here's an example of a strategic selling investment that was studied and mapped to business outcomes, which was increased revenue, reduced costs, was strategically the goal of the organization was to increase financial performance for the year. So we talked about if the program was successful, what might you see? Leading indicators, you might see sales calls increase, you might see proposals increase. We would hope we trained you to do that. That's what the investment was about. If we had those two things happen, we would see pipeline quantity increase and quality increase. That would result in salesperson's increase in commissions and turnover going down, which would increase revenue and reduce costs. Those are very quick, but on my website and in my books and a whole bunch of examples of different types of measurement maps to help get you started. So this is a way to think about mapping those cookie crumbs in the forest to get to the cottage, which would be a problem to an outcome or an investment to a business result. So we've mapped our hypothesis. We've identified the data sources from that. We've thought about those considerations, the privacy, the encryption, that stuff, and now we go and collect and organize that data. And here we need a data analyst. And a data analyst, somebody that just loves doing work in row and column and Excel pivot tables, for example. And they love finding patterns and uncovering things. And so you need this expertise to be able to get into descriptive analytics. And so those of you that are doing it have this expertise either in-house or you have the concept of building, borrowing, or buying it. And building it is hiring somebody and having them do that work, full-time or part-time for you. Borrow would be maybe there's somebody in marketing or the accounting department that's really good at Excel spreadsheets and pivot tables, and you can borrow them for your first few projects. And buying would be the use of outsiders like consultants or business professors. I know a lot of companies that got started using local business professors or college students or even high school students to do some of this work. So you don't have to make a big investment to get started in this. But I want to make a word of caution. I talked a little bit about HR systems, and it's almost like when they were handing out assignments on investments in IT and HR, we were the last dog in the dog sled to get funding. And so the view's really not very good. We're at the back of the chain. And because of that, our systems have been cobbled together. And I saw a recent study by Burson that said that HR departments average 7 systems and sometimes many more. So it's not really easy because we don't have really terrific integrated systems historically. And people data and metrics are messy and sometimes have soft elements. I've seen many cases where Jane Smith is also J.R. Smith and J. Smith in different systems. And so the point is it's not easy to get started. And your data will never be perfect, but the more you work with it, the better it will become. So we need to get over the fact that our data is not great and begin to work on it so it can become better over time. So we want to look at what participation data we look at, participants that are in the study, and then we try to find like groups that are not in the study. And that could be a program like leadership development that takes 2 years to roll out across the entire population. So within your population, you may have a participants and a non-participant groups, those that haven't taken it yet, to do comparisons. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. You have to identify, is the data internal or external? Many HR systems are run by third-party vendors, and you have to go through all kinds of extra hoops to jump through to go get that data. Even though it's your data, it's run and managed by an external source. And then we're always pulling both qualitative and quantitative data. And we'll want to make sure we have a definitive time frame for a study, because these are, and I'll show you when we get to the predictive world, these are longitudinal studies. So we want to look at things over time and see how they change. And this quote I always put in, because you will never have perfect data, and so don't let trying to get perfect data be in the way of doing the work. So we've uncovered data, we've organized it, we've found some work with the data analysts that we like, and now we're going to uncover patterns with descriptive analytics. So in there, this team will be running hundreds of analysis or pivot tables to find the 3 or 4 or 5 or 8 that have any kind of a relationship. The benefit of doing this work is it allows analysts to get familiar with the data, which is awesome, because the more you work with the data, the more you can investigate it. It also creates a data audit, so it finds gaps in completion. So if it's an important problem, an important question, you want to invest in the future to start capturing that data so it is complete. If it's not an important question, if it's maybe a nice to have but not critical, you don't invest in it. So this process really helps you understand where your data is complete and where it isn't. And generally, it will absolutely uncover trends that were not important. And sometimes it'll debunk myths, which is great. And when you get to the point where you're good at this and you begin to automate some of this, it can create incredibly quick updates when it's presented in dashboards. So it's a great way to start in moving into this world of analytics. So we've pulled data, we've filtered it by demographic, we've got all this data, and we now have a descriptive analytics study. And the study shows us that the purple line is injury claims by dollar amount over time. On the below, it's the left is 2002 to 2013. You see from left to right. And those are the dollar amount of claims over time. And the dark blue bars on the lower are the penetration sales claims, compensation claims training over time. And you can see the relationship between the more penetration we have, the injury claims begin to go down. And that's the trend that we would hope to see. So good news is we begin to see that our injury claim training has gone down as we increase, as the amounts have gone down as the training has increased. So the pattern looks like that the training is working. So when we think about that, and now we want to look at the demographics. So generally, it looks like the trend in that graph was going down, which was good. And we want to dig into the demographics behind that. And there's 3 types of demographics that we want to look at. There's individual. This list is not complete, nor will you want to investigate every single one of these for these studies, but you may have a lot of data on your individuals. In fact, I know you do. You also will want to data mine by organizational type, business unit, geography, size of team, manager and employee ratio are very good indicators. And then this other bucket, is it union, non-union, part-time, contract, et cetera. So you've got a lot of different types of demographics you can data mine. And in the study I just showed you, where injury compensation claims and training penetration are related, we then would find, and this is an example, where injury claims are reduced in certain regions and plants. Good, our training was working. Injury claims were not reduced in certain regions and plants. So the training's not working there. We would like to investigate why. There might be other factors that are in those type of either regions or plants. So we'd investigate that. And those regions and plants that did not fall into it was working or not, we'd want to say, well, why is our training having no effect in those areas? So there's really 3 takeaways from just that. And then looking at some other demographics, we find that injury claims are reduced by females over males and tenure under 5 years versus employee tenure over 5 years. And so we would want to say, why are females responding to this more than men? And why are our younger tenured employees responding to it and not our? So again, these are examples of ways you would begin to dig in with this study and do further investigations to find why things were working in some areas and not others. Now you're in this world of descriptive, which is the world of correlation. And correlation, you've heard probably a million times, does not equal causation. So I want you to be careful with your use of dashboards and benchmarks, because correlation is really a measure that indicates 2 or more variables that fluctuate together. Now, highly correlated is better than low or no correlation. And so we want to be careful and focus our work into those areas that are highly correlated, and that moves us into then the world of causation. Now, this is an example of 2 sets of data that's really highly correlated, and that's the amount of ice cream eaten per person and the amount of drownings, deaths per day. You might have heard this story. I would look at this and I would conclude that ice cream must cause drowning deaths. That's somewhat absurd, but if you didn't have context behind this data, you would conclude that based on these statistics. Well, it's the weather, it's the sun. In the spring, weather gets warmer, people eat more ice cream, and people go out and swim more. So obviously, more people that swim and more drought. So there's no relationship, although it looks like this statistically. So I use this as a pretty obscure example to just be careful of the decisions you make that are in your benchmarks and your dashboards, because it's correlated information. And you may or may not be trying to close ice cream stores to prevent drownings. So we've found all this correlated information, and we see some trends that we like, and we see some areas we think we can investigate and improve. We want to really now move into the predictive world, which is, as I said earlier, is really adding descriptive analytics and adding business outcome metrics and statistics. Now here it gets a little more difficult because you need some real specialists, and that's in statistician or data scientist work. And so I would again remind you of the concept of build, borrow, and buy. And this is an area, the statistics area, that many companies use consultants to get started in this work, because moving from a data analyst skill set to a statistician and data scientist skill set are very different and much more complicated. But work's being done, they're out there, and you can find some incredible results by moving into this arena. Moving into predictive helps you understand the true impact of an investment, and that will then help you calculate an ROI that a CFO will believe. You'll understand where your investments are working or not working, or you'll understand where your problems are and where they aren't within your organization. It provides data versus opinion to support improvement, and then again, when you get good at this, you can make live deployment improvements as you deploy programs. I'll give you just a quick conceptual of, and I'm not going to go into any statistics in this, but this is really talking about a longitudinal study, something studied over time. And we want to look at people that are in that intervention and people that are like them but don't have it yet or aren't going to get that. And so what we're looking at is their performance prior and post over time and trying to isolate that investment from all the other variables in the environment. And then we're using those contributing factors, which is the demographics, to really understand where it's working and where it's not working. And so we're really looking at three concepts statistically. We're looking at the magnitude of the impact, how certain we are statistically of that impact, and what influence does these individual demographics have on each metric. So what's the impact? How certain are we? And what's the influence of those demographics that we look at? So we've either done a descriptive or predictive analytics study, and now we want to communicate this. Always, when you present, you want to present with recommendations and try to get agreement on an implementation and evaluation plan for those recommendations. In most cases, you won't be involved in implementing the recommendations. But if you get agreement on that up front, you'll then be able to do an evaluation of those changes and adjust recommendations. And it's a continual process on these large either problems or large investments. When you present this stuff, make sure you understand your audience. I can't tell you how many times I was submarined by thinking we were doing a project report and an executive jumped in and all of a sudden we had to flip to an executive summary and we weren't necessarily prepared for that. Balance your narrative and graphics. There's a fine balance between words, numbers, and graphics. And there's a lot of help you can get in the industry to do that. And words matter. Get out of HR speak and speak the language of the business and use facts versus opinions. And finally, was the business questions answered? Go back and make sure your business questions were answered. What were your critical insights? And what were the critical recommendations? So if you can come back and hit these three issues, you'll be in good shape when you communicate your findings. After we sold Vectrix to Ultimate Software, I began to think about what I wanted to do next. And as I thought about it, and I was thinking about all this new, this new advanced analytics that the industry was doing, and I was helped pioneering that work, I kept coming back to this statistic, and that was, why is it with all the evidence we have, and some of us doing this work for well over a decade, HR departments are still so far behind in adopting analytics? And so I really spent a good part of last year putting together an online training program on really how to get started. And today's webinar was kind of the basics around all of that. And it's 7 self-paced online modules, 16 lessons in bits, 2, and I think a third hours of content. And the course really is very similar to what I talked about today, although I go into much greater detail and much greater nuance on how to do this work that I couldn't do in a brief webinar. But it actually follows the 5 steps that I talked about today and goes into much greater detail on how to get started and how to develop your business impact criteria. Every lesson and bit has downloadable slides and script. There's lots of support materials with it, and there's a peer-to-peer group, and we do some coaching. So I hope you check it out on my website. So now for a few minutes, I'll open up, if I can. Here we go. I guess I don't have any questions at this point, so I will thank you for your time. Appreciate it, and good hunting with analytics. Thank you.